Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation and recording for the part of the lesson that has us looking at the background in the Middle East. Before I get started, please let me encourage you to open up to today's lesson and to scroll down to the correct section. And please get ready to answer any key concept questions that happen to appear that correspond with the content for this reading. Please remember that you can replay any part of this presentation that you might need for detail or clarity later. Let's begin. A background on the Middle East. The Middle East is a geographical region that has been of great importance in history since ancient times. Strategically located, it is a natural land bridge connecting the continents of Asia, Africa, and Europe. It was the site of some of the world's earliest civilizations and the birthplace of three great religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In recent times, its enormous deposits of oil have made the Middle East more important than ever. But the core of the Middle East today consists of the numerous countries of Southwest Asia and the African nations of Egypt and Libya. Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco are sometimes included in the region too. Afghanistan and Sudan are occasionally included as well. Let's go ahead and talk about the people of the Middle East. Population comparisons. The Middle East has a population of about 246 million, or nearly as many people as the United States. The distribution of the population varies widely, though. The fertile regions are very densely settled, and many others are only lightly populated, while others, particularly in the deserts, are completely empty of human life. The most populous Middle Eastern countries are Turkey, Egypt, and Iran, each with more than 50 million people. The Persian Gulf states of Bahrain and Qatar have the smallest populations of about 400,000 each. Saudi Arabia, although greatest in area, has a relatively small population for its size, a little more than 10 million because much of its land is desert. Ethnic groups. Since ancient times, the Middle East has attracted migrating peoples, mixing with the earlier inhabitants of the region. They produce the peoples that make up the Middle East today. They can be classified into three main ethnic groups: Arabs, Turks, and Iranians. There are in addition smaller numbers of Kurds who are scattered across Turkey, Iran, and Iraq, Jews of varied ethnic origin who live chiefly in Israel, and Pakistanis, Armenians, and Greeks who live in mainly the island nation of Cyprus. Language and religion. The language and religion are basic elements of cultural identity in the Middle East. The major languages of the region, which correspond to three main ethnic groups, are Arabic, the most widely used language, Turkish, and Persian or Farsi, the language of the Iranians. Educated people throughout the Middle East frequently speak English or French as well. Now, Islam, the religion of the Muslims, is the predominant faith of the Middle East, and there are two main branches. There's Sunni Islam, the larger branch, and Shiite Islam, found mostly or mainly in Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon. Christianity is practiced by some Arabs, particularly in Lebanon, by the Greeks of Cyprus and the Copts in Egypt, but Judaism was the faith of ancient Israel and is the religion of the modern state of Israel today. The way of life. No more than 10% of the people of the region ever followed the nomadic way of life, represented by the desert Bedouin, and even fewer do so today. But early civilization in the Middle East was centered in agriculture, and the majority of people still earn their livelihood as settled farmers. At one time, most of the region's people inhabited villages or small towns, living and working much as their ancestors had done for centuries. This had changed dramatically as increasing numbers of people have been drawn to the cities, where about half of the population of the region now resides. The land. The Middle East is a vast region, with a total area of nearly 3,500,000 square miles. It is only slightly smaller than the United States. Saudi Arabia is the largest of the core countries of the Middle East in the area, and Bahrain, an island nation in the Persian Gulf, is the smallest in the Middle Eastern states. Let's talk about climate, a hot and dry land. Hot, dry weather is common in the Middle East for much of the year except in the highest mountains, where snow is frequent. The rainy season in most places lasts from about October to April, and in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, rain comes mainly between May and September. But there's only light, brief rainfall in most of the region, and in some areas it never rains at all. In the deserts, which are baked in the blazing sun, the daytime temperature often rises up to more than 125 degrees Fahrenheit, yet at night the deserts are cool or even cold. Life itself in the Middle East has long been dependent upon the amount of location of water, so rain-bearing winds are often unable to penetrate into the interior of the region because they are blocked by surrounding mountains. The best watered areas are usually the strips of land lying between the mountains and the sea, but the Middle East generally suffers from a severe shortage of water due to limited rainfall. Let's talk about chief cities. Early Middle Eastern civilization developed great cities, and cities continue to play an important role in the life of the region. The largest city of the Middle East is Cairo, and the capital of Egypt. Founded by Arab conquerors. In the AD 900s, it has population of about 6 million in the city proper and some 14 million in its metropolitan area. The older Egyptian port city of Alexandria, rebuilt by Alexander the Great in 300s BC, was famed by its great library, the largest in the ancient world. Istanbul, the major city of Turkey, lies on the world's most historic sites spanning Europe and Asia. As Constantinople, it was once the capital of Roman and the Byzantine empires. The importance of Jerusalem, Israel's capital, is far greater than its size. Containing, as it does, places holy to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, Tehran, the capital of Iran, is a relatively new city by Middle Eastern standards, first gaining prominence in the 1500s. But what about the economy? In terms of agriculture, although only about 15% of the land is suitable for farming, agriculture remains the region's most important economic activity. Wheat, barley, and rice are chief food crops. Figs and dates are grown in desert cases, and citrus fruits in the Mediterranean coastal region. The major commercial crops are cotton, coffee, and tobacco. Livestock raising is especially important to the agriculture economy. In terms of oil and industry, the discovery of vast oil deposits revolutionized the Middle East economy. More than half of the world's known oil reserves are found in the region. Although they are not equally distributed, Saudi Arabia has the largest deposits and is the world's leading oil producer and exporter. Iran, Iraq, and the small Persian Gulf state of Kuwait are the most other for the major producers. Aside from oil, chrome, coal, sulfur, and magnesium mined in Turkey, and the phosphates from Jordan, the region is generally poor in mineral resources. And finally, what about the history of the Middle East? Well, in terms of early history, the Middle East has been called the cradle of civilization. More than 8,000 years ago, people in this part of the world discovered the methods of agriculture and freed them from the need to wander about in search of food as hunters and gatherers. The development of settled communities and the earliest forms of government followed. Between 4000 and 3000 BC, city-states, mostly notably Sumer, began to emerge in the southern part of the fertile region between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Before the beginning of the Christian era, the Middle East had already seen the rise and eventual fall of numerous kingdoms and empires. Those of the Egyptians, Hittites, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Persians among them. But their great contributions to civilization included codes of law, writing systems, mechanical inventions such as the wheel, and the development of sciences such as the astronomy, mathematics, and Judaism, the first monotheistic religion, the faith in one God, evolved among the relatively small group of people, the ancient Hebrews. Greeks, Romans, and Arabs. Alexander the Great invaded the region with an army of Macedonians and Greeks in 300s BC and carved out a vast empire based on Greek culture. The Romans began their own conquest of the region some 3 centuries later, when the Roman Empire in the west collapsed in AD 400s. Its successor in the east, the Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, endured for another 1,000 years. Meanwhile, the Arabs, newly converted to Muslim religion by the Prophet Muhammad, swept out of the Arabian Peninsula in the 600s and created an Islamic empire. The Ottoman Empire. So other conquerors, like the Seljuk Turks, European Crusaders, and Mongols, followed in their turn. The last great empire of the region was the Ottoman Turks, who reached their height of power in the 1500s, when all the Middle East, except for Persia, came under their sway. From this high point, Ottoman power slowly declined, although the crumbling empire was to last, at least in name, until the early 1900s. But what about recent conflicts? Since World War II, the Middle East has been torn by conflicts, including 5 wars between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Israel signed a peace treaty with Egypt in 1979. However, its relations with the rest of the Arab world remained hostile until 1993. That year, Israel and Palestine Liberation Organizer signed the first in a series of accords granting limited self-rule to Palestinian Arabs in Israeli-occupied territories. Israel and Jordan also signed a peace treaty, and in 1994, Israel withdrew its forces from southern Lebanon in 2000. But at the same time, violence again erupted between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and relations improved with the death in 2004 of longtime Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. In 2005, Israel turned over its settlements in the Gaza Strip and some of the West Bank in the Palestinians. In 2007, however, Hamas, an Islamic militant party whose goal is to destroy Israel, seized control of Gaza from the Fatah, the more moderate Palestinian faction. Hamas soon started firing missiles into southern Israel, and the Israelis bombarded and then invaded Gaza. The 2-week assault devastated Gaza. Now, Lebanon fought a civil war from the mid-1970s until 1990, and was long occupied by Israel and Syria. Iran and Iraq fought a bitter war from 1980 to 1988, Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, which led to the Persian Gulf War, and Iraq was quickly defeated by a US-led multinational coalition. The United States led a Second World War against Iraq in 2003 and overthrew its dictator Saddam Hussein. Iraq held democratic elections in 2005 despite a deadly Sunni insurgency against the Shiite-dominated Iraqi government as well as the U.S. occupation forces. The level of violence in Iraq decreased in 2007 and 8, and in 2009 the U.S. combat troops were withdrawn from Iraqi cities. Iraqi forces assumed control of security, and at the end of 2009, however, there were still about 115,000 U.S. troops in Iraq. Meanwhile, violence increased in some parts of the country, and political disagreements among the various Iraqi factions threatened to force a postponement of the important national elections scheduled for 2010. Syrian forces remained in Lebanon until 2005, and they were forced out after Lebanese staged an anti-Syrian revolution in which they blamed Syrian officials for the assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. It was clear, however, that Syria continued to maintain a powerful influence over Lebanon. There was a conflict in other parts of the Middle East as well. In 2009, the government of Yemen faced a rebellion, a separatist movement, and attacks by members of Al-Qaeda, the International Islamic Terrorist Network. And the government of Iran ignored world public opinion and continued to enrich uranium. Iran insisted that its nuclear program was for peaceful purposes, but the United States and many other countries feared its purpose was to develop nuclear weapons. In 2010, violence returned to the Gaza Strip, which was controlled by Hamas and the militant Palestinian faction. Israel had been blocking entry to Gaza, and Israel Navy ships halted a flotilla of Turkish ships bringing supplies to Gaza, and 9 people on one of the ships were killed. So in a nutshell, guys, I guess you could say that the Middle East history is quite complex and convoluted, but in many ways there are internal and external factors that make that so. But understanding more about the culture here will help us understand more about the history that we're going to get into a little bit later. Thank you very much for tuning in, and good luck with completing the rest of the lesson.